To welcome you all to this month's Perspective Seminar on Unseen Pathways in Climate Mitigation with our speaker, Mr. Pranay Lal. To briefly contextualize for our external audience and for people who might end up seeing this video, we are recording this though, right, Pratha? Yeah, great. So this program, I'd just like to briefly introduce. It is a 2-year certificate initiative that blends academic rigor with field-based policy practice. Our learner cohorts are placed within district administrations where they contribute directly to the last mile delivery of social policy. We are joined today by 3 such cohorts of inspiring change makers working across the districts in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and Bodoland. And it's lovely to have you guys here. I'll also sort of contextualize these monthly perspective seminars that we actually do. We do it every month. And the intent is to sort of foster critical engagement with contemporary policy debates while grounding learners in empirical knowledge and analytical frameworks as we see it in the following themes of, let's say, ethics, understanding social policy and evolution of welfare, engendering public policy, environment and public policy, the spirit of service, and fundamentals of development and policy interventions. Within this theme of environment and policy, we can definitely place this seminar. But what I also feel the seminar does is it falls within what it really does is it highlights the local and grounded efforts in climate change mitigation and which rather remains unseen. And by bringing these lesser known pathways into focus, we hope to expand our imagination of what climate action can look like, which is rooted in resilience, adaptation, and community innovation. I'll also, to help us sort of think through these things, we have Pranay with us. I'll give a brief introduction. Pranay, you can just add to it when you start in the seminar, basically. But Pranay is a natural history writer, a public health expert, and a climate change advocate. His debut book, Indica, A Deep Natural History of the Indian Subcontinent, won multiple awards. And his second book, Invisible Empire, The Natural History of Viruses, has been equally celebrated, including the Greenlit Fest Award in 2023. His work has been translated into several languages and are widely regarded for their ability to weave science, history, and imagination together. What excites me about the seminar is the lens that Pranay brings, one of curiosity rooted in natural history. This perspective, I believe, will allow us to see climate change not only as a crisis, but as an opportunity to re-examine connections between ecology and society, between climate and health, and even between human and non-human life. For our learners, many of whom are engaged in interventions around ecological restoration, human-wildlife conflict, and public health, this promises to be especially relevant. With that, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Pranay Lal to lead us for today's conversation.
Thank you, Shruti. Am I audible? Is this good enough to go, or should I speak louder?
Yeah, you're audible and we can begin.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. I'm grateful for the PRF team to invite me to speak on this very interesting area of work, especially for those who are grassroots practitioners and young committed professionals who are going to take the battle forward in terms of meeting challenges of livelihoods in the background when climate change is going to be so rapid and very unexpected, and changes that are going to be taking place, in ways that we can't anticipate. So I think last year there was a presentation by Swapan Mehra on the policies and programs and what are the anticipated methods in which we are going to see application of climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies taking place at the national level. I think he covered it beautifully. I'm going to give a slightly different perspective. I'm going to step back and actually inquire, and I'm going to actually ask you to abandon all your preconceived ideas that you have about climate change, and step back with me in a journey that takes you back deep in time. Because I'm going to tell you very briefly. Uh, I'm not going to be, trying to throw a lot of scientific terms, but I still want to give you a glimpse of science, of what the actual problem is and where does it start from. And to understand that, I think let me just deep dive first into what I propose to do in this presentation. I want to take you back about 260, 250 million years ago. I'm talking a million years, right? Now, this is the time when the forest looked something like this. Most of the forests in India, Australia, Antarctica, Madagascar, um, Africa, South America, the area that was called Gondwana, they were called the southern continents. The forest looked something like this. This was the time when the dinosaurs hadn't emerged. It was the age of the amphibians. Now, the plants that you see are very rapidly growing plants, very tall, these very funny tail-like things that you see that look like actually like a broom on a very long stick. That's a tree that's no longer found. In fact, most of these trees are not found anymore, but they are found in the way of a fossil. They're preserved in fossil, and they've actually created all the oil and all the coal that we consume today. So this period, which is called the Permian, was a period when most of the coal that was formed in the southern continents was created. Now, why am I bringing this up? It's because these fossils were formed in a very quick succession. You see that if you look at this painting, this illustration, you see at the bottom there's a lake or some water. It's a very moist space. What would happen is that uh, these forests would get inundated by frequent floods, and the vegetation would get swept, taken into a basin where it would get deposited. And that's how all the coal and the oils that we use today got formed. So it was for over millions and millions of years that these vegetation rose, got swept, deposited in the basin, forming layers of coal, right? So it's the compression of these forests of the time from 260 to 70 to 50 million years ago that have formed all the uh, coal that we are talking about, not just coal, but also much of lignite and anthracite and other carbon fuels that we use. Now, why is this important? So the coal, the fossil fuel that we use today was formed millions of billions of years ago, but it is extracted in a minute or a few days or a few weeks or a few months, and they're burnt or combusted and to provide us energy. And in a minute or two, or in a very short span of time, not millions of years, not even hundreds of years, all this carbon gets released in a huge amount of quantity back into the atmosphere. Now, that's the real challenge. The challenge is that while this process of carbon capture by the vegetation took a few million years in the making, humankind has, over the last 100 years, or say since industrial era, since we actually started to actually leverage coal to be the main energy provider, this has been the one that has triggered the the problems of creating the imbalance between the carbon dioxide that we have in the air, right? So it's not just this, but there's also methane, there's also nitrous oxide. I'm not going to delve into them. I'm only going to talk about carbon because everybody likes to talk about carbon. And I think we'll stick our story to the story of carbon today, right? Let's move very quickly to what have humans done in terms of the carbon cycle, right? I think that's what everybody is interested in knowing because we don't want to go back deep into time that, when we invented agriculture, when our ancestors were burning the forests, I mean, of course, carbon cycles were disrupted then, but nature was given an opportunity to revive and consume that carbon dioxide back into itself, and the forests replenished themselves, right? Or the soils came back to life. But at what time did the carbon cycle start to disrupt is the question that everybody's asking. Now, before we get it there, I want you to understand because I'm going to show you this image. It's an image that most geologists use or earth scientists use. I don't want you to read this very carefully. If you look at that worm-like thing that's going down into the earth, The perspective here is that terrestrial carbon, the one that is on the surface, whether it's in the form of forests or in terms of vegetation on the forest or the forest floor, or the microbes in the oceans, microbes in the rivers, microbes in the soil, all of them that capture carbon, they eventually reach at the depths of the soils or in the deep ocean. And that's the point. If you look at this, I don't know if my cursor is, if you can see my cursor move, this place here, which is called subduction zone. Now, those are the kind of places where the terrestrial carbon starts to come down and mix with in places where the rock formation processes are happening. And a lot of this carbon, the carbon-bearing sediments that you see here, which is written here, they start to go down back into the earth. Now, that's the process of coal formation or the process of oil formation. This is a very complex diagram, but this is a very accurate diagram. If you're a geologist, it would make perfect sense that, where does carbon dioxide or carbon gases come out of, and how does it go back into the earth? Now, this is where the disruption has happened, because the cycle of carbon capture that nature itself had devised for us, and that was uh, not just photosynthesis. I mean, the big mistake that all of us imagine is that it is just the plants that are doing all the carbon capture. Well, that's not true, and I'm going to show you examples of that plants alone are not the only agency or the drivers of carbon capture. But what I want you to remember is that carbon, as soon as it's captured, needs to be taken down into deep earth or places in which it stays buried. Only then carbon capture, or the way that we want to sequester carbon, can work. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Leaving vegetation on top is a very good short-term measure, but you need to deal with that. Let me give you an example. You've had fires this year everywhere. You had fires in Uttarakhand, you had fires in Canada, you had fires in Australia, Indonesian fires, the Brazilian fires are still raging. These fires, what they mean is that a 100-year-old forest or a 1,000-year-old forest would suddenly catch fire. What it has captured over that period of time suddenly gets available up back into the air. So that process, that effort to capture carbon and to bury it deep stayed on the surface. Our effort or our initiatives should be such that the carbon goes back deep into the earth. And if that doesn't happen, carbon capture is not happening. So if anybody is telling you that we are into climate change and we are going to capture carbon using whatever method that they're saying, you need to ask for three questions. One, how do you know the how the carbon is going to get buried? Where is it going to get buried? Where is the transportation of the carbon going to be? How do you know the residence time? Now, residence time means how long do you know that it's going to stay deep for 1,000 years, 10,000 years, a million years? Because if you're doing it for, say, 50 years or 100 years, it makes no sense, right? So these three things are very critical, right? The strategy, the location, and the duration. Okay, right. Now I want you to look at this map. It's from the journal Nature. Now, if you notice, the darker it is on land, it shows that has been the degree of how much the earth has been tilled or moved and has been reworked in a sense. The mountains have been broken, the rivers have been reworked, they've been dammed, the soil has been tilled and turned over several times, right? Now look at there's certain areas like those in Greenland or north of Canada. The pressure has been little because they've been covered under ice, or Sahara, which is again pale yellow, or parts of Australia where you have a very large desert. But look at India. You have such high pressure of human beings for a very, very long time. We've reworked the earth over and over and over again without giving our land the time to revive, to rejuvenate itself, right? Now, this is a very serious problem. Why, you have such a big problem. Now, the other thing that you need to notice is that the new continents that have been colonized, Australia, America, and parts of South America, they too have very dark brown patches on them. That's because they too, within a century, they have been worked and reworked and actually been decimated and degraded to such a level. But it's not just land, because we are terrestrially biased. We are fixated by land. What I think we tend to ignore our oceans and seas and rivers. Now look at the oceans. If you look at the dark blue areas, look at the seas around Europe and the Caribbean, or Nova Scotia, the area near eastern part of America and Canada, or even the region between Gujarat and say Dubai. Those areas are dark blue. That's because they've been overfished, they've been heavily industrialized, they have been polluted. All the things that could go wrong are happening here. So there are very few pristine patches left on the planet where we can say that nature exists in the way it was intended to be, right? Okay, I'm going to make 5 propositions to you, and I'm going to try blowing your mind by saying that, these are things that you've not heard of, right? I'm going to tell you how important rivers are in terms of climate change, right? I'm going to tell you a story. There was a guy called Harold Urey. He was a professor at first in Chicago and then in New York, and he got a Nobel Prize. And one of the things that he did was write a fascinating book called The Planets: Their Origin and Development. He was a chemist sitting in his laboratory, but he imagined what would be the composition of different planets that exist across the universe, and just looking at the spectral lines and by observation, because most of these planets are lifeless, and many of the other things that came into existence that by understanding the chemistry, he tried to predict what planets were made of. When he wrote the chapter on Earth, he said that there is one place on Earth where there is something happening at a very, very regular level in terms of carbon capture, right? And it's not plants. He was quite confident that it was not plants but rock. But this reaction, and I know many of you would be chemically challenged, chemistrily challenged, or you would dread seeing it again. It must be giving you nightmares. I'm sorry, but this is a very elegant reaction. Now, this is a man who's sitting in New York, looking outside his window, and he's imagining, if there were a reaction on the surface of the Earth, devoid of plants, how is carbon being sequestered back? He imagined that there is something called, the rocks in which you have calcium silicates. Now that is CaSiO3. That's the mineral that we are talking about. Now, what he imagined was that when rain falls on a rock or on the surface of the soil, it doesn't fall purely as water. It's mildly acidic, because as rain falls, the drops capture some carbon dioxide. So it's weakly acidic. So it's a bit like Pepsi or Coke, or one of those fizzy drinks. Not as strong as them, but slightly like that. So if you were to take a litmus paper and go to a place where you have pristine rain, I'm not talking about Delhi or Bombay or even an industrial area like Kanpur or wherever, it's surely going to be acidic, right? But if you go to a place which sees the full brunt of the monsoons, where you get the pure flush of the clouds, which are absolutely pristine, you would see that the rain even there is mildly acidic. Now, what he was saying here is when acidic rain falls on granite, on CaSiO3, what it does is it captures the silicate in that, captures the carbon dioxide, and it creates a reaction in which it absorbs the carbon dioxide, binds itself, and takes it down the river in streams or groundwater, right? Now, this reaction, he imagined that happens somewhere in a very sustainable way, in a place that happens year in and year out. He says that there is some place on Earth, and he did not know. He perhaps had not traveled. But you know what came out about 50 years after he had published this equation? Chemists and biochemists and geologists were wondering whether this is even true, until two scientists, discovered that this actually happens, and it happens in the Ganga. Now, this reaction actually explains why Ganga ka pani kabhi kharab nahi hota. Why does the water of the Ganges never get spoiled, right? Now, that used to be a old an old grandmother's tale that we all heard, that, you keep bottles of Narmada, Godavari, all the other waters together, and you put Ganga. You'll see that all the other rivers of the world, or even India, would have gone, would have shown growth of microbes and green or whatever, right? But Ganga's water never gets spoiled. Okay. Now, of course, Ganga after Kanpur is questionable. Ganga west of Kanpur is, I believe, very true, that it's still very pure, still pretty good in terms of this reaction happening. So, what he predicted was that Ganga is the biggest carbon. The two scientists I mentioned were the ones who said that, Ganga is the biggest conveyor of carbon capture every year, and it happens ceaselessly because the monsoons hit the young granite of Western Himalayas, where the reaction takes place. It gets carried into the Ganga, and it does not happen in Brahmaputra or Tista or Yamuna or any other river. It only happens in the Ganga, right? So I'm not trying to, solemnize or support or give credence to to a myth. In fact, I'm trying to bust the myth. I'm saying there is a scientific reason for why Ganga's water doesn't get spoiled. Now, what the other beauty is that Ganga carries, along with Brahmaputra and Tista and other rivers that create the massive delta of the what I call the Bengal Rivers delta, is the huge amount of sediment that they carry. So the other big myth that has been perpetuated is floods are not a good sign. In fact, if you look at nature, floods are a great thing because that's what causes carbon barrier, right? Remember the coal formations theory that I told you? That was actually sinking in the carbon. It made a warm world slightly cooler because it took away all the carbon, right? Now, this is what the great rivers are supposed to do. When they send sediment down after floods, they actually take a lot of carbon. Ganga takes carbon in both forms, organic and inorganic, right? Other rivers take largely organic compound. Organic means anything that is from the vegetation, from vegetable matter, like plants or dead animals or shelly creatures, microbes and other things. Ganga not only carries that, but it also carries this chemical component. Slide that I showed you earlier, the Urey's reaction, that too goes with it, right? So this massive engine captures about 20% of the world's natural processes, what it would have captured in nature, happened here. But because we've been acidifying rivers, especially Ganga, and acidifying the other rivers and doing excessive agriculture along the banks, we've disrupted the system. So this capture is now hugely complex. The point I'm making here is that if you were to look at the sediment load, which actually is an indicator of how much carbon gets carried by different rivers, look at Nile, which is here. I mean, for those of you who don't know where Nile is, this is Nile. Nile is a huge river, a massive river. But remember that the sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa started to desiccate. For several centuries it's been desiccating. But even a large river like, say, Congo, which is here, or Amazon, which is here, right? They're mighty rivers. I mean, they carry a huge amount of water, but they do not carry enough sediment. Look at the flushing that the three mighty rivers, Indus, Brahmaputra, and Tista, Meghna, Yamuna, Jamuna, so many other rivers, Ariel Khan. I mean, I can go on. I mean, there are about 400 rivers that break and merge and break break up break away from each other over and over again, creating the Great Bengal Delta. But also look at Indus. Indus at one time was the mightiest river. It was mightier than both Ganga and Brahmaputra. It lost its power, right? So the point I'm making here is that carbon burial through natural methods, through natural means, is critical for taking forward any initiative that you want to. And in nature, this service is provided, whether it's done through rivers or through groundwater, right? Now, groundwater eventually would go and start depositing at layers under rocks. So it's effectively buried, right? It doesn't come out unless we start puncturing the ground. That's what we've been doing, taking out ground, right? With that comes out the outgassing of the carbon dioxide also happens. That's the real tragedy of taking out excess groundwater from soils. Now let's look at the benefits of deserts. Now you would be saying, I'm gone completely bonkers, right? You would say, hey, what benefits can deserts have? The only benefits that deserts have is that we can do nuclear explosions there, or rehabilitate people who we don't like, just rehabilitate them there, right? So those are the kind of things that stories that I've heard. But if you were to look at deserts, notice that most deserts, including the Sahara, or even look at Saudi Arabia, this is 55 million years ago, which is very recent in human history, or sorry, in Earth's history. It's very, very recent. The dinosaurs have just got extinct. The flowering plants have just emerged. Okay, and the mammals are emerging. This is the time when much of what we see around us started to evolve at this time. In geological or evolutionary history, this is very recent. But notice that there are no deserts in Australia, there are no deserts in Africa, then there's no desert, there's no Thar desert, there's no desert anywhere. Except for Mongolia and the desert in America, there are no deserts. But if you notice, Greenland has a desert, right? Which would eventually turn green, actually, right? But the point that I'm making here is that the deserts are a creation of how landforms, ocean currents, and air systems work. It's got nothing to do with vegetation that has been, the myth that has been perpetuated that large herbivores and humans have consumed the vegetation, and therefore the deserts have expanded. Humans did not do that. There are some deserts that have been created by humans, like the ones near Aral Sea and those kind of places, but that's because of many other things and excessive exploitation of water. It's got nothing to do the reasons that very many people give. But by the time, just 21,000 years ago, deserts began to emerge. Look at Thar Desert, just a speck of it started to come. Look at Western Saudi Arabia, you start to see desert emerge. Then, even now, the Sahara hasn't emerged, right? And even Australian desert is still creeping in, right? So it's a very recent development. The deserts that we see around us are recent, okay? They're not very old. I want to show you this image. Just look at this very carefully. It's a beautiful GIF image which I stole from the internet, but I just want to show you this. What you see here is the Western Sahara desert dust is flying or being carried by winds to the Amazon and to the Caribbean. Had this dust not been flowing into the Amazon or to the Caribbean Sea, you wouldn't have resplendent forests or beautiful coral seas, those pristine islands that you see in the West Indies. You would not see them. That's because a very vital ingredient, potassium, comes from these desert sands, and also iron. Now, both these minerals are in short supply, because if it rains so much in the Amazon, everything gets carried away, right? There's very little to hold on to. Now, what nourishes the soils of these amazing forests is this metabolism of dust, this movement of dust that goes from one landscape to another. Now, this was not known until very recently. I mean, Charles Darwin wrote about dust hitting his ship, the Beagle, when he was going down to South America, but he did not know this phenomenon. He talked about a gale which was full of desert sand, but he did not know where it was coming from, right? Now, it was only much later that we started realizing, when we had satellite imagery like this, that we could see the effect of fertilization, that inducement, that embellishment of elements in the soil and the ecosystem that makes them resplendent, right? The same happens in India. You think the Western Ghats don't get an infusion of dust? They do. They get it from Oman and East Africa. I'm not going to delve too much on this. I'm going to come to my next point, which is oceans. Like I said earlier, we are fixated by land. We think only what exists on land is everything, but that's not true. There's far more carbon capture that happens in the top 80 layers of the oceans than in all trees, on all plants, and all the soil on land. By the way, 40%, depending on where you are in the world, 40% of a tropical forest carbon is stored in soil. It's not in trees. Trees do it, shrubs do it, lianas do it, everything. But groundwater and soils are about 40 to 45% at any time, right? So that's an important part. But even then, oceans outscore them many, many times. No matter how good an Amazon or a Congo or Indonesian forest is, oceans do a far better job, a more efficient job of carbon capture. How's that? I want to tell you a story. Now, this is a statue from Bandhavgarh. Some of you might have seen it. It's called the Vishnu the Preserver. Now, Vishnu, as you know, had this ability to bring balance to any after wars and other things. People pray to Vishnu to bring balance to life, right? Balance to the ecosystems. But I'm not interested in the statue so much here, but I want you to look at the pond that is next to it. It's covered with something which is what we in Hindi call kai, or I mean, there's nothing pleasant. I'm sure in Bangla or Tamil or Marathi, there's not a pleasant word for it, right? Now, this is the organism that provided all the free oxygen that you and I breathe, you know, for starting from about 3.5 billion years, about half a billion years after the Earth started to cool and all of that. I'm not going to go into the Earth's history. I just want to say for 3.5 billion years, it's these organisms on top of all water bodies are the ones that have been producing all the oxygen, right? But the more important bit is that they not only produce oxygen, they also have a very short life cycle. So when they are mature and they get predated upon, they die and sink right there. Now, remember the catchword that I told you? It was carbon burial. So the carbon burial is happening here in lakes, rivers, ponds, right? So this is the essential thing that happens in water bodies, but not so much in forests or any other terrestrial landscape. So water is an efficient place not only for capture, but also for burial. It's very immediate, right? It happens on a daily basis. So in trees, for example, if you're in the conifer areas or in the temperate zone, you will wait for the tree leaves to fall down, right? I mean, there will be some carbon transport through the roots, but the ultimate transfer happens when the leaf is shed or the pine cones are shed and the pine needles are shed, and that's when the burial process begins. But a lot of it is lost because it starts to decompose, right? Or it catches fire, which is the worst case scenario. In the case of water, because there is water on top, there is burial with the sediment, and it forms layer upon layer of this thick, gooey mass, which does not bubble out as much as, say, forest soil, right? Now, we have fossils like these. We have evidence from geologists' work. This is from a place called Sonbhadra, where you had this fossil. This is from about 3.2 billion years old fossil. What is interesting is if you notice the concentric circles around it, it's like tree rings, they're growing. So these colonies, these mats of organisms started to accrete around themselves as they captured carbon, right? And became big, okay? So the point I'm making here is that these lifelong colonies of very, very, this perhaps would have been 1,000 or 1,500-year-old colony of organisms that had accreted all the carbon around it to capture carbon from the air and fix it. But it was only in the late 1980s, that we actually discovered that who is the real champion carbon fixer in the world. Now, the two organisms that you see on the left, Prochlorococcus and Synechococcus, are the masters. Effectively, these two organisms capture not all, about 22% of all the world's carbon. Okay, 22% of all the world carbon. So if you put, the forests of the world and everything together, this guy might still tip the balance, these two, because they work day in and day out, and they persist in cold oceans and in warm oceans for about from the top layer to about 80 meters. That's where they function, right? And once they die, like I said, once they get predated upon or they become aged, they just die, they burst open, and they go right inside or under the bottom of the sea, right? So the two other creatures that are there, this hairy looking thing called Trichodesmium, and tricho means hair, by the way. So Trichodesmium and Microcystis, both these are also very, very crucial organisms because they fix sulfur and nitrogen. Now, without them, Prochlorococcus and Synechococcus would not be able to function. So you need everything. So So the other myth that we have, the mix, uh, the the complexity of the problem that we have just now is that we are focusing on just one element, carbon. We think carbon is our enemy, we need to deal with that. No, we have a problem also with nitrogen. We also have a problem with potassium. We have destroyed the sulfur cycles. We are not seeing the linkages, right? So the linkages between mineral cycles are as important as the linkages between landscapes. Remember what I told you about Ganga? The granite that exists is on top 5% or 7% of Ganga's flow in the Gangotri region, where you have the young granite, right? That's where the monsoons fall, etch the granite and take it down. But it's the whole landscape that is critical. Because if you acidify one place or you dam one place, you're going to have a problem, right? Because the sediment is not going to go back, it's going to go back into the air. And that's the problem with dams. I'm going to come back to that later. So if you were to do a map of the world and do all the famous organisms which we don't know, who should be actually the poster child of our carbon capture story, this is how this painting would look like. This is how they are spread over the top 80 meters. The thicker the color, the heavier the color in this, the the depth, it actually shows their depth, how deep they can go in terms of carbon capture. But the real star, like I said, is Prochlorococcus and its cousin Synechococcus. Okay, now I'm going to come to, it's not just the microbes, but it's also another fish called lanternfish, right, which is a champion, right? Now, the lanternfish, outside of the microbes, the lanternfish is the biggest migrant which migrates on a daily basis uh, on Earth. What they do is they go thousands of meters below the sea level every year, and every day, sorry, and they come back every night to feed on microbes. So what they do is during the daytime, to avoid predation from birds and other fish, they go into deep sea. So if you notice, some of them are bioluminescent, right? But once it's dark, they come back to the top and start to feed on the organisms like Prochlorococcus or Synechococcus, and then they take it down with them, where they go and die or defecate, which is of course releasing carbon, right? So once they take it up and down, they are themselves churning the ocean, feeding on something and taking the carbon down with them. So it's not just the death of the microbes, also creatures like lanternfish, the most abundant fish in the sea and the most diverse fish in the sea. There's a very interesting story about the lanternfish, which I must tell you. After World War II, they started to map the tropical oceans, the seabed, trying to understand which is the deepest point on the Earth, and how is the underwater topography of the seas. And several times when ships and submarines went, they would use echolocators to see the depth. Right? They would send a sound wave, and once it would bounce up, depending on the time they would the reflected wave would send, they would be able to calculate the depth. Right now, in several places, they found that they were getting errors of huge numbers. About 2 or 3,000 meter uh, errors, and they could not figure out why this was happening. And then someone realized that there was a large mass of fish that was just at the bottom of the sea, or close to the bottom of the sea, from where their reflection, the sound got reflected. So there was this huge mass, like an underwater cloud, which was bouncing back this sound and giving this false reading, right? So that's something that we've never known, and we really don't know how many species of lanternfish actually exist. Now, this is the biggest vertebrate consumer of carbon in the world, right? And we don't know anything about it. And the other big consumer is, of course, the giant whales, which we have hunted to death, right? We hunted the whales to produce whale oil before we had coal that was fueling um, producing electricity. There was whale oil that was being used in cities like London and New York and Paris. So, whale blubber was used because it was very good quality uh, oil. It's very very, very potent source of energy, very concentrated source of energy. When it was burnt, it produced a very luminous light, which was used for burning. But once we hunted them during the industrial age, and then till very recently, till the 1970s, 1980s, countries were hunting them for meat. So only after that some whale species, the populations have started to rise, or recover rather. So I think, from the smallest vertebrate to the largest vertebrate, all of them in the seas depend on these microbes, and all of them are so closely related in the carbon fixing cycle on a daily basis. Now that's a story that's never been told, right? I'm going to just give you a map again, just to take forward the map that what I showed you earlier, the NOAA map. If you were to look at where is it that the maximum amount of carbon fixation or nitrogen fixation. I remember I told you about trichodesmium. Look at this. Trichodesmium works in so many different places. Now, if you were to acidify this, not only does the nitrogen cycle break down, it's also the carbon cycle stuff, right? Now, this is my final slide. I don't have any more to say. I think, we have a handful of solutions for a very complex problem that we call climate change, right? We've been given plant trees and everything will work. Well, planting trees would have worked till 1970, 1975. I think that point was well past after 1970s. Tree planting alone is not going to help us. Tree planting with soil conservation could have worked, but I don't think that's enough. There are other technological methods like using minerals and other things. Um, they may or may not work because we really don't have field trials. Everybody's is jumping headlong uh, into the whole climate bandwagon, and I don't think people understand this. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because of this. All of you work in districts, right? So if you were to ask, say, if you work in a district, say, let's say Jajpur, or let's say Sultan, any district, right? If you were to ask for maps, where it falls in on the monsoon map, the drought map, the soil map, the geology map. You don't have the groundwater maps. You don't have the disappearing lakes maps or the ponds maps, right? Even the soil maps are pretty inaccurate, right? Now, within this, if you were to start looking at strategies, for example, there's something called enhanced rock weathering, biochar. I'm not sure whether the same mineral will work in every soil type or in every uh, climatic conditions, especially when precipitation and temperature differs from site to site. So the carbon capture is not going to happen at the same level of efficiency, right? Or there's another thing called biochar. Again, it's replete with problems, right? But it's just being pushed. People are buying carbon credits. There is no government regulation on who can do it, how they need to do it, what are the disclosures, what are the legal mechanisms, who's going to come and check from the government side, who's going to protect the communities when it comes to climate projects. Why is it that the equation keeps people out? I mean, we are working in the fields of farmers, or we are doing carbon capture through trees in forested areas or village commons. But the returns to the poorest of the poor is very, very little. I mean, I think the stories that came out 2 or 3 years ago in Down to Earth, The Guardian, the exposes that happened was a big shakeup. But somehow the market correction hasn't happened, right? So I think the climate solutions are scientifically flawed, and I think many of them need to be looked at. They're very landscape specific, they're very contextual. They have to be made tailored for each village, each panchayat, each pond, each stream, each river, each forest, right? It can't be that, if you're doing the same thing in Sultanpur, you can also do it in Sitapur, and from Sitapur, you can take it to Banaras, from Banaras, you can take it to even if it's along the same river, it doesn't work, right? Everything looks the same, it's not, right? Like I said earlier, microbes and along with minerals are perhaps the best bet we have because they do this service naturally, right? I think the question that you need to ask if anybody is saying, I'm doing carbon capture, you need to say, how long are you going to capture the carbon for? How long is it going to be residing? where you're going to park it, and at what depth would you be parking the carbon. How do you know your carbon is going to go that deep and it's going to stay safe? If you equate carbon with, say, nuclear waste, right? We are very worried about nuclear waste, that we have to keep it secure, it shouldn't leak out and all of that, right? But if you were to treat carbon as sacrosanct, or as with the same baby gloves, right? Most of these projects would fail, right? Because they take a leakage percentage which nobody can figure out how those calculations are made, and if we really know in the field, in on the site where the carbon capture is happening, whether that burial is actually taking place, right? And finally, I think, like I said, we don't know much. We did not know till very recently the role of Ganga, or the North Atlantic conveyor, and there's so many other places, Antarctica, and the rivers by themselves. I think deserts. I mean, we think deserts are waste. Greening deserts, I think, is a very silly thing. Deserts are a natural response to the existence of landscapes, and each landscape depends on the other. It's not that they are all, you know, firm, and there's no connection between the desert and the region next to it. I mean, are you saying that the Aravali Hills and the Thar Desert and the western Uttar Pradesh plains have no connection? They do. The dust that comes each year from Rajasthan should not be stopped. Dust storms are good. It's a response of the nature, of natural systems. Nature is going to respond that way. It's a self-correcting system. So it's not that I mean, it's a wasteful thing if you think you're going to make a green barrier and protect your city. Well, it's going to work for a few years, and then it's a colossal loss. I think since 1960s, France has been trying it, China has tried it. There's limited success. 10 years later, it's all gone. Australia has tried it and said, uh, let's not do it anymore. Let's stop doing it. There's no. So this is my last slide. Thank you so much. My only thing, my recommendation to you would be, ask questions whenever people come with simple solutions. That I'm going to plant trees. I'm going to get I'm going to get carbon credits. I'm going to pass 20% of the carbon credits to the community, and everybody's happy. Well, don't be happy. You're being cheated. You're also being cheated in giving this solace, this false sense of comfort that carbon is being captured. Well, it's not being captured, especially if you're just planting trees and not looking at soil or the rock or the water, the groundwater that goes below. If you're not looking at the full system, you're being fooled. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pranay. Um, we open the floor for questions. If you have any questions, you can type it in the chat box. You can unmute yourself and just go ahead.
Well, if there are no questions, I think either it was not useful, which is fine, or it's all very well understood, which is fine as well.
No, you can also, if the bandwidth is not working, you can just put it on the screen. Yeah.
Right. So just wanted to ask, like, 2 3 months back, I just heard the term like a carbon credit. Like even TRI is working here with in Jharkhand, and I am in Gumla district. So like just last week, I just get a call to, there is some company they are coming for mapping those trees. So as you said, like, we are just making fools to the people. Like, just wanted to know more, like, how.
So, yeah, I think, Avdesh, good question. See, like I said, planting, you have
Your
patjhad, you
your
have
voice is
trees.
bit low. So
Okay, that's a good question. So, is this better?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, you know, planting trees is good, don't get me wrong, but don't get the false sense that it's going to absorb all the carbon dioxide and, make the world a safer place. No. Like I said, had we done it till the 1970s or maybe early 1980s, we could have been fine, but no longer. I'm looking at the macro perspective. Coming to the local perspective, Gumla, that particular block, that particular gaon, of course, trees help. I mean, it improves microclimate, they reduce runoff, all those things are very important. But when it comes to carbon credit, ask them, what is the additional thing we can do to capture carbon on the, I think you're planting mangoes, right?
Yeah,
Amrapali,
right,
right? You're
right.
doing Amrapali mango, right? So, why is I mean, what do you do with the leaf litter? आम का पत्ता गिरता है ना? What do you do once the leaf litter happens, right? You collect it, somebody burns it, or it goes into waste. That's decomposition, so that has to be accounted for, which I believe will be accounted. There's the major resource, like I said, 40 to 45% of tropical soil. The more permanent carbon capture is in the soil, not in the trees. If the forest were to lose, or rather burn, or get affected by a disease, God forbid, um, all of it will go back into the atmosphere, right? Your biggest support system is not the tree, it's the soil, and the soil, the deeper the carbon goes, the organic molecule, or the leaf litter is covered and put into a pit and covered with soil and forgotten, right? It will help nature more, right? That's the point. Avdesh, let's remember this.
Yeah,
Carbon got from the bottom, from coal, not far from Gumla, go 185 kilometers east of Gumla is Dhanbad, right? Which
yeah,
is in pits, right? I mean,
yeah,
not us is in pits, but also the coal is in pits, right? So the point is that it's been extracted over and over again from the depths of the earth from deep time, right? And it needs to now go back to that place where it can be broken down by microbes and can stay there without it being released back into the atmosphere. Carbon should not stay on the surface. Trees by themselves leave it on the surface, right? But what else do you need to do? You need to do additional services, additional activities to improve कार्बन कैप्चर इन द सॉइल. आपने पेड़ लगा दिया मगर पेड़ के जड़ों के नीचे और जो पत्ते गिर रहे हैं उसको वापस आप कार्बन उस कार्बन को आप मिट्टी के नीचे, हाउ डू यू पुट इट बैक, हाउ डू यू पुश इट डाउन फर्दर, दैट्स द इम्पोर्टेंट. Leaving it on
right.
the surface makes no sense.
Now
Yeah,
I get it.
you
Thank
get
you.
it? Okay.
Yes.
Sanchit had asked a question on what's the impact of dams, as you mentioned earlier. So, yeah.
Hi, Sanchit. Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have brought that up in my last slide. So when you stop the natural flow of water, like I said, it carries both organic and inorganic carbon in it, right? And other minerals, you're stopping the mineral cycle, right? So if you create a dam because, the whole myth that creating dams is renewable energy, not true. Uh, you guys are on your laptops or your phone, go to Google, open something called blue methane. There are carbon credits being given for decommissioning of dams or reducing methane that is released by dams. Now, as you know, methane is far more potent than carbon dioxide, right? So why are you giving carbon credits to dams if they are not green? Then either we should not call dam electricity coming from dams as green, or we should not have carbon credits for mitigating emission of methane from dams, right? So dams by themselves, if you go to an Indian dam which is choked, I would recommend go to Bhakra. It looks like a large green pond, does not produce much electricity anymore. It's only, it's just got a layer of decomposing green mass, right? And it produces methane. There is no natural cycle of sediment coming in and sediment going out. That's a problem. Dams basically stop the flow, the natural flow of water, and they end up becoming a source of carbon rather than sink of. That's the problem. Yeah. Look at this company called Blue Methane. They have a pretty good video on it, which tells you how they talk about. Yeah. Have I answered your question, Sanjeev? Give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, thanks.
So I have another questions like just this week like one organization visited like DFO office, and he mentioned like India consumes like 14 times more oxygen than it produces through its green cover. So just wanted to know like is that was right, or like as I can see there are many forests and all, and even oceans covered by, surrounded by oceans and all.
You met your DFO and said that India produces 40 times the oxygen that it.
Consumes,
Okay.
consumes. Yeah.
I don't know how you work the math there, because I'm sure that person has not looked at rivers, because our rivers are dead. They're actually producing carbon dioxide and methane. They're not, they should have been absorbing. They're all chemically polluted, right? Or sewage, right? So I don't trust. I mean, for me, if you were to look at the pecking order, it would be, you know, uh, rivers, lakes, water bodies as primary thing. Key forest areas where you have carbon capture in deep soil, I would go for them, like Sundarbans or riverine forests or Terai region. They are fabulous forests, but we've given them bad names. But Terai itself is a derogatory term, right? Um, so I don't know. I mean, one of the things that you should do is, how did you work out these numbers? Calculation kaisa aaya? How did you work this now? And you have to ask these questions. That how did you look at the carbon emission and oxygen consumption in lakes, rivers, soils, or are you only doing trees? Because that's not right. See, India's forests have now become a net source of carbon and not sink. Okay. How? Because we burn our forest. We
Right.
overgraze our forest. Right. So they're just basically skeletal trees. There's no second layer, right? Except for national parks, which might be okay. All the other forests outside of national parks are hugely abused. They're just trees that are standing up, and there's nothing else, right? So there
Right.
is no second layer, there's no third layer, there's no fourth layer. The soils are degraded, right? Where does the carbon capture happen? And one fire, everything is gone back. 100 years of work gone in, you know, 1 day, 2 day, 5 day, or however long the fire lasts, right? So those are the kind of concerns that you need to ask. That aapko kaise pata? How do you know? And this is where critical thinking comes in. If you know the various pieces, you need to ask this question. And I'm not saying, listen, um, these are concerns that have not even been addressed at the highest level of science or scientific discussions. For
Right.
example, rivers were not mentioned in the first three reports of the IPCC. Everybody talks about as if IPCC is a Bible. It's not. In fact, at times they've been completely wrong. For example, in the last COP, when they were discussing 1.5, 2 degrees, and 4 degrees, you know, a week prior to the discussions, we had already crossed 1.5 degrees, and yet they were negotiating 1.5. That's how oblivious they were. Because after the scientists, it's the economists and the politicians who take over the negotiations. It's not the scientists, right? And even within the scientific community, it depends who's funding who. If the oil company is funding most of those science groups, right? A huge number of organizations today get funded by oil companies or coal companies, right? And they
Right.
don't want to divest out of coal or petrol or oil or any other thing, right? Or automobile companies, right? They don't want to divest out of these things. There's a huge amount of conflict of interest. Look at why the Global Plastics Treaty collapsed, right? Because every delegation had somebody from the plastics industry. Every country, right? And they don't want to lose their business. It's such a convenient thing, right? They don't want to find alternatives. Do you know the patent of the solar cell? When was it done? Do you know the history of solar cell? It'll shock you. So it was done around the time when Edison had discovered, the AC/DC current, right? And he had started to electrify New York. The first panel was put in New York in 1898. 1898 was the first solar panel which was functional. Okay, that man was killed mysteriously. And for 20 or 30 years, nobody remembered solar cell until Europe decided to start investing in solar research. We have known about the power of solar cells for a very long time. In fact, just around the time when electricity from coal was going to be generated. Right? So I want you to read that history. It's available on the net. There's several very good books on the solar conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. It's the fact that the patent was given then and there was a workable model that was available world over is a travesty in itself. And how the oil industries have spoiled it. You know, why did BP buy up all the solar patents? You know, that's the question you need to ask. Right? British Petroleum bought all the, you know, the. I see Amit Parihar raising a question. I hope Avdesh have answered your question.
Yes.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Hi, good evening.
First of all, thanks a
Yes.
lot for making us travel through the historic times to the present. And throughout your presentation, the most catching thing was the carbon credit. And many of the questions were from this topic only, because this is the word that has now become a fashion all across India. And my question is that, sir, the findings that you presented about the trade-offs within the plantation thing, the plantation is not the only solution to tackle the carbon problem. But in that manner, anything cannot solve this issue in entirety. Like every solution has its trade-offs and collateral damage. So I just want to understand when these findings, as you have very clearly and very simply mentioned, that what are the losses in greening the desert areas and other similar, and the negative side of dams, the blue methane thing, that are very interesting to know. Like nobody talks about them. So I just want to understand how these findings, these facts, and these figures are catered into the policy making. Because right now we are running the campaign of Ek Ped Maa Ke Naam 2.0, but nobody is talking about litter management. But as you have already worked at higher levels also, that what is the response from policy side? How they account for it when they design the policy at the higher levels? Because we are implementing Ek Ped Maa Ke Naam 1.0, 2.0, but nobody is talking about litter management. And similarly for the carbon credit also, like we are focusing on plantation, but nobody is talking about the litter or the carbon that again gets released into the atmosphere. So the major part of question ends here, and I just want to understand. I think, like, I am having an intuition that the net result must be in our favor. That's why, like, plantation is getting so much attraction, and nobody's talking about litter management and the back carbon that is being released by the leaves and all. So is it the case that the net result in our favor? So we are talking about only about one side, so that people can simply follow the process, and following the principle of greatest good of greatest number, we are like not making the things complicated for them by introducing litter management and other layers to the entire topic. Hope I have communicated my query to you.
Yeah, I think you hit upon too many philosophical chords. I'll just try answering a couple. So, like I said, everything has to be contextual. You know, each landscape will do something or the other to help improve the climate problem. Right? So that's the first thing.
So you are not audible.
Oops.
Is this better? Is this good?
Yeah.
Yes, it's better.
Okay. So Amit, like I said, everything is contextual, right? So every site in your village or wherever will have a role to play in a different way, right? That's the first thing. Whether you want to do litter management, that's a very minor thing. Okay? I mean, litter management will not even do 0.001% of it. Nothing. It's not gonna. The point I'm making here is that a lot of activities that are happening are things that will cause harm. You know, we, because are not consulting enough with the people who know the science, we have taken what is we think is a low-hanging fruit. We love low-hanging fruits, but you know, we must remember low-hanging fruits are the ones that also attract all the worms, right? So it may not be the most tasty fruit, right? But it is good because corporates want to, or even government want that, you know, everybody should not feel despondent, that they should feel optimistic. Agar, you know, aapne ek ped laga liya gaon mein, if you planted one tree anywhere, you think that, oh, now I have done my bit for climate change, right? Well, not really. I don't think it's going to work. It only satisfies your ego. It's like, lowering the window of your car and giving 10 rupees to somebody who's seeking money for food or whatever. It's a good deed. Government feels happy. Corporate gets you know, all the blandishment that it wants, and everybody's happy. Well, it's not going to work, right? I mean, it's just fooling ourselves. So I think what I'm asking you to do is, as the world becomes more complex, you need to start asking these questions: that is this what is going to work in the region? And I may not have the answer for it, but the answers will be someone who knows. I mean, you ask these questions from these companies. Now, I don't know programs like Ek Peड़ Maa Ke Naam or version 2. I mean, all these things, planted 1 million trees on World Environment Day. I mean, think about it. Have you seen a forest in which they plant trees in a straight line? How, how does that happen? And do you have a forest which has only one tree species? But our stupid, uh, you know, administrators have no thought, and I've seen this happen over and over and over again. They just don't understand. We do what is called several stages, and you make storied forests based on that. You're supposed to understand what is the abundance of the tree, what species exist in what numbers, and what is the age distribution, and that's how you don't plant trees just for the heck of it, right? आपने एक लाइन से पेड़ लगा दिए, that's not going to work. Okay, and that's typically the problem with these Miyawaki forests. I mean, that's perhaps the most ridiculous thing that you will hear of. And the afforestation, where gaddhas are done by some labor. They've just been told to start digging pits because some mantri is going to come and plant the first tree, and then school children will plant all the other trees. Well, even if the trees, God bless them, they survive there, it's not going to be a functional forest. That's not how forests look like, or that's not how forests survive. They don't survive like that, right? I see there's a question. Sorry, Shruti, I'll take this question. It says by Debujit Datta. He says, during my master's, we were taught about CCS machines, which is carbon capture and storage machines, which are effective in carbon capture and storing. How effective are these machines in doing so? Well, the success theoretically works. Again, they're very region specific. You can only do it in places where you've got basalt rock, which is of certain quality, and you have presence of a free source of energy, like Iceland, where you have hydrothermal energy and you've got basalt, right? So it works very well there. It's not, I mean, the results have not been encouraging. I mean, billions have been put in those machines, giant machines. Currently, they've not reached the economy of scale, or nor have they been capturing enough carbon dioxide. So the results are still not very, very promising. Although as a technology, it looks promising. So the CCS machines, what's called carbon capture and storage machines, they're all these very, very heavy devices, which are giant fans. They suck in all the carbon dioxide. They put it through something, a mineral, liquid, alkaline mineral like potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide, which also has its own chemical cost, right? The machines also have their chemical cost, right? So, or the cost of making them. So there's a carbon cost too, right? But eventually, after all of that is accounted for, it's pushed down in the ground, and we hope that this is going to solve the Earth's problems. I don't know what is the estimated timelines that they're looking at. They were supposed to provide results by now, but I think they are slightly late. But I hope they can get our mind off this massive challenge that we've got, and they are able to restore back our climate variability. Right? I see there's a question. There's a hand raised by Rakhi Sharma. Rakhi, what?
Good evening, sir. Thank you, sir. Um, so my question is like, see, if like hearing from you, I totally feel that you are somebody who is working for this cause. But my question is, how do we make the actual people, the policymakers or the government listen to us? I mean, if we consider ourselves as a community who, like, I understand that the first step for us is to be educated. So, like from today's lecture, we now know but how do we actually bring it into practice so that it actually benefits what we are trying to do?
Uh, Great question, Rakhi. The question you don't have to ask is who the policymaker is, because they will not know, right? Uh, so my recommendation would be that you bring this to the attention of the person who's selling the carbon to you, right? So that is what I would recommend. So my sense is that you ask these difficult questions. How do you know how long the carbon is going to get captured? How do you know where it's going to get captured? How do you know that it's not going to contaminate the field down, away? Say it's going to leach into the river or something. Ask those difficult questions. What is the environmental basis of it?
Sir, but like say in today's world, I mean, the system how it is in present, it's enabling them. Like say if we are asking the questions, they are still able to get away without answering those questions, or how the system is currently running is enabling them to continue however they are doing.
I think
So
the
I think,
process, yeah, you're right, Raki. I think there are very few people who are actually questioning this, right? How do we know this is going to work? Because it worked in Brazil, it's not going to work. I mean, are you sure it's going to work in India? And it's going to work across India, in the desert sands, in Deccan lava, in Sundarbans, in high Himalayas, is it going to work everywhere? I'm not sure. Because everywhere, like I said, temperature, moisture regimes are very different, right? So it's a very difficult question to answer. And nobody can say with certainty, and therefore we say do field trials before going for carbon credits. Carbon credits take a long time for them to be generated and to be validated, right? So I think those are the kind of concerns that you should not question policymakers because they are completely confused. They don't even know the system. In fact, uh, uh, you know, India's roadmap is quite questionable in its terms. What they have proposed, none of them have worked. Yeah. I mean, none of them will work, and I don't think they have worked. I don't think. I mean, if you were to put it through a solid, rigorous analysis, I don't think it works. But the thing is, my question to you, my proposal to you, Rakhi, is that whoever comes to you, you should say, how do you know itna carbon capture hoga? How do you know ye kahan bury hoga? How do you know its permanence? How do you, for example, if it's just like I think Anand had asked, and sorry, Amit had asked that the litter thing that I had reached it earlier. How do you make sure that the litter itself is not getting burnt and releasing more carbon that we capture, right? Gaon wale, they sweep everything and take it and they burn it, right? So how do you? I mean, of course, it's come along the girth of the tree. They measure girth and the crown cover, right? But what happens if there is an epidemic or trees that are stolen? Of course, they will deduct that. Epidemic, again, they will deduct that carbon credit. But the loss is to the community. How do you safeguard the community? Where is the insurance for the community, right? So that just now the problem with markets, carbon markets, is that there's no regulator and there's no ethical body that looks at the flow of who's measuring, how they're measuring, and the ethic is not about the economic transaction. The bigger ethic is the scientific ethic. That how do you claim that so much carbon dioxide has been mitigated? That is problematic by itself, right? So the ethic levels, there is no ethical barrier just now, right? And that's why the whole market is perverse.
thank you, sir. Thank you.
I hope I have no. I mean, I'm not trying to dissuade you, Rakhi or Amit or Vijit. I'm just only saying, ask questions, be satisfied because you're protecting the community, right? Because these guys will, the buyer will suddenly say, I'm not buying from you anymore, right? The certifier and the agency will also say, okay, we are not honoring this proposal anymore. What happens to the community? They've already given their land, they planted, say, something. What happens to them, right? They are in a lurch. And I think this has happened amply in Africa, in India. It's happened with cook stoves in Andhra Pradesh. Read the horror stories. I think Down to Earth has done several very good stories. The Guardian did a whole series. This has been a big question. I think so. All these large corporates that are buying, They're just buying because it's a ego trip, so nothing more.
Hello, sir. Just an observation that 5 to 7 years back, when we used to talk about climate change, no talk would be over without mentioning ozone, right? And now we see that it's healing. Montreal Protocol asked us to ban HCFCs, CFCs, and now the researchers are saying that by 2050, ozone will be ranking just behind CO2 as a driver of heating. And it will definitely offset many of the benefits from banning CFCs. So, what do you have to say about that? Just clarity.
So, what had happened is the Montreal Protocol was a very good treaty. It worked beautifully, but this is the lapse of the agencies that were supposed to monitor, especially for third and fourth generation of chemicals that had the potential of ozone depletion. So one thing is that they had a scheduled list of chemicals which they were monitoring. But again, as after the 2010s, the monitoring levels have declined hugely. And even the monitoring of the whole was not happening. It was only a couple of countries, South Africa, Australia, more importantly, Chile, NOAA in America, they were monitoring it, but nobody was raising the issue that, the ozone layer is coming and going and it's finally started to expand, right? It had healed itself in the 80s, 90s. We saw the healing happen in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. We saw that it had covered it pretty well, right? Again, this is conflict of interest, and the corporations that sit in positions of in policy circles where they're pushing the boundaries. And this is the problem, because you're not able to remove the conflict of interest. There are people who have a clear conflict of interest. There are NGOs with conflict of interest. There are governments being backed by corporates with conflicts of interest. And they are the ones who actually disrupt the entire thing. They put the entire world in jeopardy because of that. So think about all the countries in the southern, hemisphere, because that's where the nature of the ozone layer depletion begins, and it's going to reemerge, and it's going to reemerge strongly this time, because the treaty needs to be reactivated, rejuvenated, and renegotiated. But again, given the condition that the world is in, I don't imagine. I don't know. Conditions are not ripe. It's a sad situation.
Thank you, sir.
If there are any more questions, you could just, this is the last part. I guess no. Right. We can definitely connect. You can send me your questions, or Pranay, if you're okay. I could share your email ID if that works for you, and maybe some of us can reach out. But thanks a lot for joining in. I really had fun listening to the session, and I'm sure like a lot of our interventions and perspectives have been built. A lot of the work that we do is somehow related to this area, and the idea was to just shake us up actually a little bit. But yeah, I'm sure that happened. But yeah, thank you so much for delivering this session, Pranay, and we'll be in touch. Absolutely. And thank you for joining in. But yeah,
Thank you for having me. And warm wishes to everyone, and onwards and upwards.
likewise. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.